Good afternoon. I recognize that I'm in the dangerous position of being between you and coffee. I will be quick. I last spoke on the stage at UXLx in 2016, and if you were there then, you heard me talking about a very weird, esoteric concept called semantic noodling and meaning machines. I don't know why Bruno opted for that weird, esoteric, non-designed talk, but the good news is today, he has also opted for a weird, non-designed talk. I guess I'm just his wild card on these things. So I'm a designer, I'm of you, I run the worldwide Design for AI Guild at IBM, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about science fiction. How many folks in the audience consider themselves fans of science fiction? A good majority. It's the second most popular genre according to box office revenues, right after action and adventure, so I'm not surprised. And that's what I'm going to be talking a little bit about today. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to think about something, which is, presume you're walking down the street of Lisbon, and I am a reporter, and I come up to you with a microphone, and I ask you, what role would you say that AI should play in medical diagnoses? Think about your answer, and I'm interested in it, but I'm more interested in how your answer would change if I first showed you this. There are a couple of giggles up there. If you're not familiar with it, this is Baymax, an adorable, fluffy health bot in the movie Big Hero 6. He is the protagonist of well, one of the protagonists of the film, but he's also sort of this medical nurse that you just want to take home and love. Now think about how your answer would change if I showed you this first. Those people giggling in the audience know that this is the Doctor from Star Trek Voyager. Kind of a neutral Pinocchio character. He always wanted to be a real boy. Now think about how your answer would change if I showed you this. Most people probably know this one, but this is the Doctor from the alien ship Nostromo on Alien, who sold out his crew to be eaten by xenomorphs because of corporate orders. The point of all this is to say that how you think about AI largely depends upon how you know AI. And up until last November, I would say that most people know AI through sci-fi. And that begs a pretty important question. Is sci-fi a reliable narrator about AI? Well, I happen to run a blog called sci-fi-interfaces.com, where since the publication of mine and Nathan's book in 2012, I've been reviewing and doing studies like this and publishing them. And in 2017, I wanted to answer this question. And I wanted to answer it really thoroughly, because I could opine, but I'm not that kind of person. I really want to get into the details and come up with some numbers for the answer. So in order to try and answer this question, I started to look at a bunch of sci-fi movies with AI in them, starting with Maria and Metropolis from 1927, Fritz Lang, all the way to other things like BB-8, the adorable spherical robot from Star Wars Part 7 through 9. It's a complicated thing. Even the sort of dark psychopathic AI HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey from Stanley Kubrick, and even some you may have forgotten about, like Teddy from AI Artificial Intelligence. All told, there were 147 movies and television shows that had AI or an AI character in them, and I watched them all. I'm going to take a drink just to let that sink in. Okay. So what I needed to do from this is I had a survey of movies and television shows, and I needed to say, okay, well, what do these things say about AI? So after I was done watching each one, I simply wrote down what it was that I thought that the filmmakers or the television producers were trying to get us to, or what they were suggesting about AI. And they included things like evil forces will use AI for evil. It included things like humans will be immaterial to AI. It includes things like AI will evolve super quickly. If you can see color, you'll notice that I'm color coding those for their positivity or negativity, and that comes into play a little bit later. It includes some positive things like, oh, like Baymax. AIs will be useful servants. And some, what we'll learn are sort of ridiculous things, like what is the citizenship status of general AI, and AI is just evil out of the box. You can't do anything about it. So all told, when I consolidated those things, I wound up with 35 what I call just takeaways. Hollywood has these 35 things that it says, up until 2017 when I finished the study, that it says that we should think or take away about AI. If you're curious about the type size in that column, the bigger the type size, the more often it appeared in the survey. So the big ones, evil will use AI for evil, or AI will evolve quickly, are the ones that just appeared the most. So now I had a set of things that Hollywood tells you about AI. How then, oh, by the way, if you can't tell, I'm building up a big infographic. That's where that infographic is. I'll repeat this at the end of the talk, but I'll pause now for any cameras. Okay. Okay, so we had a list of the things that Hollywood suggests about AI. And so the next step is to say, well, okay, how do we know whether this is the right things to be saying about AI? What stories should we be telling ourselves? Now, I'm a person with opinions, but I try not to be arrogant, so I didn't answer this question myself. What I did is I went out and found manifestos. They include things like the AI Google R principles, the Asilomar AI principles. It included things like the Foley, the Future of Life Institute's manifestos. The Montreal Declaration, Carol, came out the year after I published this study. It's not included. But it also included things like the Juvet Agenda that I participated in, and even certain books. Stuart Armstrong wrote a great book. Oh, let me go down one. Called Smarter Than Us. Really good one if you want to get terrified. Or Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom. So all told, I had about 14 of these manifestos that said this is what we should think about AI, and this is what we should do about AI. But comparing 53 takeaways to 14 manifestos is a difficult task. So again, I went through this sort of reductive phase where I went through each of the manifestos and wrote down and summarized what it said and then correlated that across the other manifestos. They included things like artificial general intelligence's goals must be aligned with ours before it gets to super AI. Granted, super true. We must ban autonomous weapons. I'm down for that. Things like AI must be accountable, or we must fund AI research. So all told, there were 54 imperatives that I was able to pull out of those manifestos. And once I had that, I was able to sort of run a diff, if I can use a computer term, which is just to compare the two lists in the middle. 100 years of what science fiction is telling us, and the things that thought leaders and computer scientists are telling us about AI. And I just said, what connects? So there are lines up there on the screen, and if you go to the poster, there will probably be a lot more clear. But this became the basis of the answer of the question that we started with, which is that some of the stuff up top Hollywood talks about is stuff that science cares about and thought leaders care about. But there's a whole lot of stuff that Hollywood likes to talk about that at least these manifestos don't care at all about. These are the things that I call pure fiction. Things that Hollywood may make for movies. I don't know if they make for good movies, but they make for movies, and that writers really are fond of them. Studios are really fond of them. I am disinterested in those things, partially because I know they are fiction, and I hope you will become too. But the answer to my original question is, well, what do computer scientists and thought leaders and machine ethicists care about that Hollywood's not talking about? And that's that long list there. That's a pretty scary list when you think about it. This is what I call the untold AI. Those things that everyone ought to know about artificial intelligence as we sort of pursue it or as it's coming over us, like the tsunami that it is. If we go deeply into this, I don't have time to go over all the 29 of them, but it includes things like we must fund AI research. We can't just let corporations go out and tinker. It includes things like we must create effective public policy in advance of the changes of AI, because to be responsive to something this fast means lots of suffering. And the last two I'll share with you is that AI reasoning must be examinable, because if it's all a black box, then it can't be accountable. Pretty critical things. You are more than welcome after this 30 minutes to go check out all 29 of them, but we just don't have time here. Okay, I didn't do this on paper. I'm a big nerd, so I did this in a spreadsheet. And once you put all this stuff into a spreadsheet, it allows you to do some other things as well. And I'm gonna bother you with just 5 sub things that I found fascinating as I was doing all this research. Here's a smattering of them, but we're gonna talk about this one. Like, one thing I was able to just do is a count. How many times are we how often are we talking about AI in Hollywood? And it starts in 1927. I mentioned Fritz Lang's Metropolis earlier, where he was sort of coping with the effects of Industrial Revolution on his country. And then about 10 years later, we had a really hard to find film called, and I'm gonna murder the German, Der Herr der Welt. Then there was a relative period of silence when we got Robbie the Robot, and we started talking about it once every 5 years. And then, as of the turn of the century, an explosion of writers thinking about AI and putting that out into the world for us to be exposed to. Once I did that, I was able to take a look at the running average valence of those movies. Were they positive or generally negative about AI? Of course, Fritz Lang was very negative. Maria, the AI in that movie, was very negative. Robbie the Robot is responsible for that big green hump there, and then we get into Stanley Kubrick, who ruined it in the 1960s. And since then, we've been sort of wavering, but you can see that the average is beginning to level off, and it's right below the line. So it's slightly negative on average now, for your information. I also was able to take a look at the locations of the producers of these films, and that was fascinating. If you look for the highest average rating of AI movies, turns out it's from Hungary, but that's because they've done so few, and one of those was Blade Runner 2049. Good job, Hungary. The worst is their neighbor, Bulgaria, had the lowest average for movies that are best left unmentioned. The United States of America, go team, we create the most sci-fi. And it's not because we create the most movies. Bollywood dwarfs us with the amount of films they create, but we are just sort of obsessed with the technology bit. But as a percentage, a proportion of the shows they make, Australia is most obsessed with AI. It's great, even though you probably can't think of many Australian sci-fi movies. As a proportion of all of them, they're the most obsessed. And the last bit is, if you had to make a bet on what country's gonna make the best AI, turns out it's Britain, and I think that's largely because of Black Mirror. Okay, another funny thing I did is I said, I wonder how those takeaways relate to their average rating on RottenTomatoes.com. Turns out if you're reading a review of a movie that has AI in it, and they mention one of these 4 things, I don't know whether it's correlative or causal, but it's probably going to be a good movie. AI will be truly alien. AI will enable mind crimes against virtual sentiences. Like, that's complicated and deep, and pretty good bet that the writers have done their research. I also answered the other one, which is if you read a review about an AI movie that has this in it, it's going to be trash. Okay. Last 2 of these little diversions. I also wanted to know what shows do the best at representing the AI science. So I went through all of the imperatives from the manifestos, compared those to the individual shows, and these are the top 10. I don't like all these movies, but boy howdy do they really illustrate a lot of those things that we need to care about. And I'm a super big fanboy about Person of Interest, the television show, and Colossus, the Forbidden Project from 1970. Please watch those. I completed this in 2017, and I've been asked a number of times since then, well, what's happened since then? And not a lot that I have observed that contradicts anything that I found in this study. But I did want to recommend a show that's just launched, which is Mrs. Davis. It deals with an artificial intelligence, and if you make it to the end, I think there are 8 episodes, it has a really big criticism for the, pardon my French, the bullshit engine that is AI, and it's a very charmingly told tale, so I highly recommend it. Okay, whew. So those were my little diversions, and now I want to get back to this main question, right? Is sci-fi telling us the right stories about AI? It's stated as a yes or no question, but of course the answer does not befit a yes or a no. And so what I did is I went in and I found sort of the 5 categories that we can reasonably keep in our 7 ± 2 memories. So the first thing that the manifestos care about is that we are creating the right AI. And you've already heard a lot about this on stage today. It needs to be equitable. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be ethical and reduce harm as much as possible. We should build the right AI. And Hollywood gets about 40% of it right. We should also build the AI right, which is to say that we should be inclusive, as we heard before. We should not only include a lot of people, but be very deliberative and diligent in our creation of it. And Hollywood is terrible. Oh, you can barely see the pie, can you? Sorry about that. Is terrible at that. They maybe get a 5th of what the manifestos care about. We have to manage the risks and effects, right? Human intelligence has got us into some messes, and hopefully AI can get us out of that, but it's not without cost. So we need to watch for what those things are. We need to be aware of them. We need to study it in advance. This is what Hollywood gets right the second best. What they get right the best is that we must monitor AI, right? It's going to evolve as it's out there in the world, especially when we're in the speculative, as yet, world of artificial general intelligence. And we need to monitor whether it's trending poorly or well. Because if it's trending poorly, we're gonna have to pull the plug. Hollywood, that's what they're great at. They love talking about that because I guess that's the dramatic thing. The last thing is encouraging an accurate social narrative. Because what we don't want is we don't want audiences either happy and complacent about AI when it stands to do a lot of harm, and we also don't want them like Blake Lemoine from Google and panicked about the sentience of a large language model. And yet, if you take nothing else away from this, Hollywood is not doing this well at all. Whew. So that's sort of the 5 report card grades. And as you can see, on average, Hollywood gets about 33% of what the manifestos care about. So even though I too count myself as a big sci-fi fan, I want you to keep a skeptical mind as you turn to sci-fi for entertainment and recognize that it is a very poor instructor for the realities of AI, even if it's a very fun one. And it ties right into sort of the tagline that I have for the blog, which is, I had a moment, a beat that I added at the last minute. If you're a numbers person, the number that it gets out of the manifesto is 54, is only 29. I already said that on stage, I don't know why they did that. But the tagline for the blog is stop watching sci-fi and please start using it. Okay, it's time for coffee. If you want that URL to get really deep into either the blog posts or the post of the graphic itself, it's right up there. Thank you all.